Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome once again to the NPTEL module on strategic trade and protectionism, where we have already landed in week number 3, about to complete week number 3 with the last lecture of this, which is on extension to HO theory. So far we discussed in detail about HO theory. Now this particular lecture is on just completing HO theory with certain extension to it. Myself, Dr. Pratap Simhanti, presently a faculty member in the Department of Humanities and Social Science, IIT Roorkee. So, in this particular lecture, we will certainly try to understand the earlier discussion on Hexagonal model. Also, we will try to identify the problems with the Hexagonal model, and some of the and we will discuss the previous issues as well. We will also try to talk about what are the new additions to the HO model. Well, I think in the last 4 lectures in this week, we discussed HO theory by examples, by number of empirical evidences. Also, we discussed the criticism to HO theory with the help of many contexts, like we discussed about Leontief paradox with the help of input output model. We also discussed FIR factor intensity reversal model, where we already identified the gaps in the HO model. So, Hexagonal model in a nutshell suggests a new classical theory, as we already pointed out many times in the last week as well. So, this new classical theory which actually attaches many changes to the classical model, and specifically HO theory talked about specialization, but the specialization is incomplete, and there are possibility of mixed product in the basket of commodities produced by a country, and based on the relative advantage, again the country could able to export or import. Now HO theory is on the factor endowments. The endowments actually determine the production function, and since it is exhibited with increasing opportunity scale of production, that lead to incomplete specialization. So, and the product which discussed largely based on the product and its export to another country based on the resource availability. Now, question arises, though Hexer and Olin both discuss about specialization and import or export based on the resources, but in reality the countries which have higher resources on a particular product to be produced, but they are net importers rather than exporters, identified by input output model in Leontief analysis. Similarly, we also talked about factor FIR, factor intensity reversal model. So, now what are the other additions to Hexer theory, so that we can end off this particular lecture in this week, purely specializing on Hexer related aspects. Now, to have further clarification on the recent data, recent evidences of acceleroidal model, I collected many information from United Nations statistics based on based on the available resources. Here what I found, I observed that capital stock as part of endowment we discussed number of times. So, the capital stock how it is determined must be discussed. Capital stock determined by various factor, but here the extent of capital stock is measured per worker in as per the latest available report 2014 so basically in capital stock in 2014 in United States, I mean in dollar terms, especially in United States dollar term, and also expressed with per capita purchasing power parity PPP terms, PPP with a figure of or neutralized with 2011 data. So, expressed in PPP of 2011 data, which states that now the depth of the color, the bluish color and its depth determines the magnitude of capital stock per worker in the respective countries. Now, on the dark blue which is here as greater than 2 lakhs, greater than 2 lakhs capital stock, 2 lakhs US dollar capital stock is per worker. Now, these are expressed in PPP terms, so can be compared with other countries. So, these are not in purely in absolute numbers. So, these are expressed in purchasing parity numbers. So, therefore, these are comparable. So, what we found, we observe here, the United States have huge capital stock. I mean this northern part if you compare with this extent, even including India, China, these are relatively lesser capital stock than that of United States. Similarly, here another country even continent Australia has also huge capital stock. So, certain European countries also have had higher capital stock as compared to other countries. So, that is the latest figure, and accordingly we can project some forms of export or import of the respective resources. Now, if we express as we have seen from the same report, there are many data collected from 1994 to 2014. During this period the change has been observed, change of capital stock has been observed. Now, which country actually progress in terms of capital stock? Now, with a 200% and more, 200% and more rise in capital stock are experienced in these continents India and China. So, similarly some Southeast Asian countries as well, and whereas Russia, even those developed countries claim to be the developed countries, and their change on capital stock or capital physical capital is very negligible over this period as presented by the UN statistics. Now, similarly we should also try to know some other figures which are quite interesting to note. Some other figures like relative changes in physical capital stock 1988 to 2014. So, we try to compare here with all countries and emerging economies like India and China. So, in this context physical capital is being compared. So, the physical capital the change again it is relative changes I have emphasized in the title. So, the title suggests that the relative change are hovering around very less percentage except a bit of Korea, Spain and Ireland. Switzerland and Algeria negatively negative changes are noted, but largely those developed countries as we have presented during this period have experienced the change near about minus 0.5 to 0.5 percentage, which is very less. So, in the near terms those countries which claim to be the capital intensive countries, I do not think they are going to progress or export capital intensive products in the coming years. So, this is very clear, and these changes are compared with a baseline of 1988, because changes are based on a base period 1928. In the previous figure also, so the baseline was mentioned, change of physical stock from here it is 1994, but now we are comparing with 1988. Now, as against the all countries and emerging economies. Now, especially in emerging economies, there is no negative change, very clearly mentioned here, there is no negative change, no negative part. But China, look at China, though the percentage variation of capital change in those emerging countries are not too high, it is again within the limit of 0.5, but at least there is no negative term. And India, it is near about half of 0.5. So, it is still better than that of many other countries. Now, as it is not just human capital, not just physical capital which matters for the country to export products or specialize in certain products. These economics suggest that it is not physical capital which actually determine the change. Rather, we now must think about human capital, which is composed of majorly education segment. Even this human capital discussions are very much part of the new classical growth theory model, like like in the endogenous growth model, it has been endogenized. So, usually in solo growth model, we did not see the endogeneity of the human capital, but later on in the advanced growth model these factors has been incorporated. Now, based on that, many countries expect that human capital is really the determinant behind the productivity growth or the intensity of production or intensive production. So, human capital index per person in 2014, as per the official figure, latest official figure, we must try to understand that there are variations. Now, human capital here in this figure is measured by a composite average of schooling years and return on education. So, these are the two directions by which the human capital has been measured. Now, based on this, especially in 2014, the countries which are shaded with dark blue having greater than 3.5 is the index number. So, majorly again the physical capital, the country is poised with high physical capital, could able to spend hugely on human capital indices, therefore, their return is also much better. So, second highest probably is with India, China and those emerging country economies. So, what we have observed that human capital really is one of the important factors behind change in the export and import function. Now, look at percentage change of human capital from 1994 to 2014. What is important here is the following. So, what we found percentage change, just human capital is not enough, percentage is also, change is also quite important. We have observed that in case of percentage change, India's position was India and other emerging countries positions were much better than the developed countries. So, what we expect from HO model not necessarily we followed if we emphasize on change, the relative changes, the absolute changes. In the absolute terms, probably we have seen or we have already seen that developed countries are better off, whereas the percentage change wise, if you see it from again from 1994 to 2014, the change is much better in India. Look at the change is quite exceptionally better in India, in some part of other emerging countries like Brazil, even in some part of African continent as well. So, the human capital rise is exceptionally better for India. So, India has better future for specializing in those products which can generate good result in terms of exports. So, what we have largely understood so far based on the data is the following. We said that the countries poised with certain resources would necessarily export those variety of product, but now in reality the emerging countries have actually specialized in human capital, and they have grown their human capital segment, and those human capital has been incorporated in other model, other sector in physical, it is actually supporting physical capital largely. So, therefore, the developing countries are now in a position to export other variety of products which requires human capital. Now let us understand, we have so far understood hexagonal model, assumptions, criticisms, or even facts, figures. So, in previous lectures we did that. Now, let us fill up the gap with some extension of the HO model. Now, there are several alternative trade models which actually elaborate again the theory of comparative advantage, but as an extension of HO, because they largely emphasize the very assumption of modern assumption of neoclassical theory. So, one of the theories called product life cycle model, which focuses on technological change and life history of many manufactured items through various forms of innovation, stabilization and standardization. Now, this theory, initially we said a country is going to specialize in some forms of products, but and keep on exporting, but that will not continue for a long term. We have also explained it might continue for long term, it might continue for short term, it may continue for medium term. There are various models we have studied in the last lecture, last lecture, which talked about its implications. Now, product cycle model, which says that it goes by certain cycle. One manufacturer or the industry will grow its product, but the product will be actually imitated by other countries over the time. So, therefore, the initial impetus received in the form of exports by the exporting country may not continue for a long run. So, therefore, in the long run the possibility of exporting this product continually is I think not feasible or not possible because of various other factors. Similarly, we will discuss in detail in our next slide. Now, what else is also important so far as extensions of this HO model is concerned? Intra-firm trade model. Within the firm, trade is possible. One sort of example which we are going to take it forward in the next week is actually based on economy of scale of production. Intra-firm allows comparative advantage, but incorporates industrial organization. It also emphasizes organizations, strategies based on organizations and groupism or basically collating with other strategies, other countries, other products. There are various possibilities. Another way of understanding the model basically based on technological differences. Initially we said it is based on availability of resources, therefore, there are certain difference of technological additions, therefore, capital stocks will add certain changes. So, one model specifically targeted for identifying the specialization is through technological gap. So, it was by Posner in 1961. The Posner emphasized the new product and the product process. So, new product and product process, or later on after Posner product cycle theory came to the limelight, and which emphasize the innovator through the process to the adopters. And accordingly, the advanced countries developed the new product and introduced the product with temporary monopoly power. This is what is very important. temporary monopoly power as the sole exporter of the product. But later on the technology producing I mean the country producing as the technology producing the product, technological advanced countries producing the product, technology producing countries produce the gets the product becomes more widespread and production will spread to other nations. In short, this is they are short sentences. So, therefore, you read it between the lines can able to understand properly. So, therefore, the product cycle model moves international trade to a standard comparative advantage framework, and it has a time component over the time how things gets revolved. So, in short, the 1966 model of Vernon product cycle theory, which is which says that as production becomes standardized, the original producer of the product loses its technologically based comparative advantage in the production of product and becomes an importer of the product. So, basically as I already said, over the time this phenomena gets changed. Now, what is all about? What are the arguments behind? So, basically there are cyclical changes on the process, and A. Raymond Vernon added that when a manufactured good is developed, producers experiment it and seek consumers reaction after the production. When the production leaves the early stage, the goods begins to be standardized in terms of size, maybe by manufacturing process, by features, by qualities. Now, finally, consumption of the good in a high country exceeds its production moves where the labor costs are lower. I mean basically once it gets realized, it gets its movement to other countries which does not have the endowment. So, that therefore, it is one of the extension to the model HO model. Now, again we here emphasize the production function to be based on the neoclassical framework, and these are from different source. So, these are not developed by the author. So, it is from different books collected. So, therefore, we need to understand the concept based on different experts view. Now, what we have observed here, now look at from this side, innovating country and imitating country. Initially from starting with a time horizon and the quantity of production gets produced in the stage 1. So, the country those are used to be the the advanced countries usually claimed as having huge number of patents. They in the initial stage they used to be exporter as well as importer. So, net balance of trade is 0 or there is no such surplus. But later on they started imitating, in there is a stage they start imitating, and I mean not start imitating, they started innovating. So, they innovate in the second stage. So, therefore, their net addition to export is higher positive, and they keep on adding optimize their products till the time another country start, I mean when the first country, the innovating country exports, the imitating country actually imports. The extent these are the extent of import equated with the exporting countries. Now, it reaches at a maximum point and there has been a depleting point. From that point in the imitating country or the importer started imitating and replaced their imports by exports. So, exports are did in the stage number 4. So, in the latter part when the imitating country has been successful and replaced many exports, could able to actually produce, and initially and now look at their consumption function and production function. This line bold line is consumption function for the innovating country, and this line is for production function for that country, and this is for the imitating country. Now, you can see the imitating country in the latter part of the periods are the net exporter, whereas the innovating country are the net importers. So, therefore, product cycle model highlights the fact that the kind of regime some countries enjoys or some country poised with may not be continuing in the long run. Now, in short, if you just put it like this in this figure, so here early, middle and late. In the late, So, consumption increases, so production receded. So, therefore, the stories of net addition to export gets changed over time. Okay. So, product cycle theory accordingly developed, and so and in another case where so here we said consumption exceeds production. In the next one we say production exceed in the imitating country, the production exceeds consumption in after some period or in the long run, or maybe in the medium term to long run. So, they gets more value addition. So, they are claiming to be the better ones. Likewise, the emerging countries have actually magnificently changed their pattern. So, much of the international trade in international trade discussion, we have observed that intra-firm trade is very important, and we will also take it forward in detail, that which means trade between the parent company in the home country and its affiliate in a foreign country attached with huge forms of intra-firm, which means firms take advantage of cross country differences in the price of inputs, quality of inputs, and accordingly they can minimize their cost. And to continue with the intra-firm discussion, especially in the mid 1990s, 95 onwards, 2/3 of the US merchandise exports and 2/5 of US merchandise imports carried out within firms. So, I mean, you can imagine how much of the products are actually carried out, especially through intra-firm channel. Now, similarly, since intra-firms are being discussed in the present day's discussion of trade theories as an extension of HO theory, outsourcing has been observed as one of the most important channels, because to minimize the cost, the countries tap their resources from other countries. Now, if when they find that our labor cost is expensive here, they outsource their product to other countries which has cheaper labor cost, and they outsource their product. Likewise, we have huge BPO sectors in India, and we provide service oriented support to the topmost companies. They outsource to minimize the cost. So, globalization actually has helped a lot to think of intra-firm trade, and then so the country the HO theory is purely based on domestic endowments, but now in the present day's discussion this is no more domestic. Now, we are actually exploring or tapping the benefits across the globe. So, this is very important in the present day discussions. So, outsourcing looks like technological change in the data, because why technological change? Because the additions to the value or the knowledge addition is actually flowing, and it is tapped from another source. So, empirical results in Stolper-Samuelson theorem may need to be rethought. Why to be thought of again? Only because Stolper-Samuelson theory, which says that income distribution or redistribution of income, which was discussed, and specifically to the homogeneous sector, specific sector, and the a mobile factor as discussed in Stolper-Samuelson theory. Now, due to outsourcing or technological change through outsourcing, which has been incorporated in the model of trade, may lead to further redistribution of income. In addition, also clean theoretical results in an environment with outsourcing are hard to come by dimensionality problems. There are various dimensional issues to be to be discussed in the next week in detail, where we will talk about the outsourcing aspects with the help of intra-industry model carefully. It also says that outsourcing in models with distortions may produce large welfare effects. Okay, it may go for derived through, I mean it may go for unions or through welfare state, depending upon the extent of change, it might be also emphasized. Now, which we have already discussed in previous lectures, where we talked about transportation cost. If you are incorporated in the model, our specialization might vary. Initially in all the models so far, they emphasize transportation cost to be 0 to discuss trade. Now, we have already seen that if transportation cost is added, still HO theory is not going to be, or is not going to be invalidated. So, still HO theory stands and important. We have already discussed, but still transportation cost is one of the most important aspects of cost addition. Homogeneous goods will be in trade internationally only if the pre-trade price difference exceeds transport cost. Now, transportation cost where non-traded goods and services like or type of goods for which transportation cost exceed price difference across nations. So, basically non-traded goods and services are goods for which transportation cost exceeds price difference. Basically the products which are exported or traded, it is quite sure that the transportation cost is not exceeding. If it is exceeding by with the cost production cost, then those products are not traded. Similar, I mean we have already cited these examples. I think since we have already discussed the fact that we can identify the transportation cost in a partial equilibrium setup with demand and supply figure like this. So, there might be an equilibrium price, whatever the country one expose, that will be trapped in the form of imports by another country. But if there will be transportation cost, there just prices will be shifted, prices will be changed. So, and accordingly there will be new extent of production we have already discussed, and but therefore, the HO theory is still valid, but this is simply an addition to the model. Now, in a nutshell, we have discussed HO theory, its extension, its empirical evidences, its criticisms. Now, what is left then? HO theory, another extension in the present time is through new trade theory. HO theory is also called classical theory, this is also called classical theory, but new trade theory where we will talk about the production function. So, our next class will guide you very systematically on why we need for a new trade theory, because of the fact that HO theory did not consider production function to be exhibiting with increasing returns to scale. Production function were assumed to be constant return following with constant return scale. So, this is what is so far discussed. I think next class will be very interesting if we discuss this in detail, and some of the questions we will discuss in our separate lecture. With this, let me stop here, we will carry forward. Thank you.